This testimony was recorded in the early 2000s, 3 years before her death. For 48 years, Noémie Clervaux kept to herself what she experienced in the prisoner of war camps under the German occupation. Silence was her way of surviving. Speaking out, her last form of resistance. Without seeking forgiveness, without asking to be judged, she decided to speak because time was running out. These are the words she carried with her throughout her life. Listen to the end and never let this be forgotten. If you search the official archives, you will read reports about the end, about the Tafus, about the summary executions by the Petit Mat. You will see figures, dates, strategic maps. But the archives are silent on what really happened when the lights went out in Barak 4. She doesn't mention the ritual. The real war, the one that broke our souls long before it broke our bodies, wasn't fought with cannons or aerial bombardments. It unfolded in terrifying silence, inside a sterile room, under the clinical gaze of a man who never raised his voice. We are taught that evil is chaotic, noisy, violent. That's a lie. I learned at 23 that absolute evil is meticulous. It is clean. It is mathematical, and for us, this evil had a precise measurement, an insurmountable distance separating our humanity from our statue-object status. 16 centimeters. It is this number that still wakes me at night, 60 years later, my body bathed in cold sweat, frantically searching for the hem of my nightgown to make sure it's long enough. My name is Noémie Clervaux, and before becoming a mere number on an inventory list, I was a student. I lived in Saint-Germain-des-Prés in a world that smelled of old paper, roasted coffee, and the illusion of freedom. I spent my days debating symbolist poetry, convinced, with a typical arrogance of youth, that culture was an impenetrable shield against barbarity. I was naive. I believed that war was a man's affair, something distant that happened on the Eastern Front or in government offices. I didn't know that war could knock on my door on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in the form of 2 polite officers who asked me to follow them for a routine check. I didn't even have time to finish my cup of tea. I left a book open on the bedside table, convinced I would return that evening to finish the chapter. I never saw that apartment again. I never saw the girl I was that morning again. She died in the truck that was taking us east, suffocated by the smell of diesel and the collective fear of 30 other women. Strange how memory works. I don't remember the face of the soldier who pushed me onto the train, but I remember the feel of the wooden floor against my cheek. I remember the sound of the wheels on the rails, a hypnotic rhythm that marked our descent into hell. Tack, 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 tack. Every kilometer took us further from civilization and closer to a world where moral rules no longer existed. We traveled for 3 days without water, without light, crammed together like cattle. At first, there were cries, prayers, cries of no in the darkness. Then silence settled in, a heavy, thick silence, the silence of understanding. We knew, without needing to say it, that we were no longer French citizens. We had become cargo. When the doors finally opened, the air wasn't fresh. It was thick with ash. A greasy gray dust that clung to the skin and seeped into the air. We had arrived. This story, the story of Naomi and the thousands of women whose voices were silenced, is reconstructed here with an absolute commitment to historical and emotional truth. To support this work of remembrance and allow other forgotten stories to come to light, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Tell us in the comments from which city or country you are listening to this testimony today. Your presence is what keeps this story alive. The camp wasn't the chaos I had imagined. It was worse, it was a factory. Everything was orderly, aligned, symmetrical. We were made to go downstairs, we were sorted. That's where I saw Heinz for the first time. He didn't look like the monster in the propaganda cartoons. His face wasn't twisted by hatred. On the contrary, he was icily elegant. His uniform impeccably tailored. His polished boots reflecting the gray sky. He observed us not with taste, but with scientific curiosity, like an entomologist observing insects he is about to pin to a corkboard. He didn't shout, he almost whispered, and it was this gentleness that was terrifying. He lined us up in the central courtyard in the light rain and uttered the words that would define our existence for the next 2 years. He said that discipline was the highest form of civilization. He said that to re-educate us, he had to teach us precision. That's when he took this object from his pocket. A simple wooden ruler. Not a weapon, not a whip. A school ruler with black markings. He held it up so we could all see it. 16 centimeters, he announced. That's the limit. That's the boundary between order and chaos. We didn't understand yet. We were naked, shivering with cold, our shorn hair lying on the muddy ground around us. Clothes were thrown to us. Rough, gray, ill-fitting skirts. But they had all been altered. They were short, too short for winter, too short for decency, too short to allow us to feel human. Heinz explained the rule to us with disconcerting calm. No skirt was to fall below 16 centimeters above the knee. It wasn't a question of saving fabric. It was a question of visibility. He wanted to see. He wanted us to know that he could see. The first night was the longest of my life. We were crammed onto wooden platforms, without mattresses, without blankets, only these ridiculous skirts and thin shirts. The cold was a physical bite, a beast that gnawed at our toes and fingers. But worse than the cold was the posture. We couldn't curl up freely. The guards walked by with lanterns, checking that the rule was being followed even in our sleep. If we pulled the cloth covering our legs, it was an act of rebellion. I spent the night motionless, my muscles stiff, my eyes wide open, fixed on the planks of the bunk above. I listened to the uneven breathing, the stifled sobs, and the babbling that came and went. I told myself, this can't be it, this can't be war. We can't die of shame. I was wrong. Shame is a slow poison, far more effective than death. The next morning at dawn, roll call began. We had to stand at attention in the courtyard for hours. The wind whipped our bare legs. Our skin became mottled purple and red. Heinz walked through the ranks. He didn't look at our faces. He didn't look at our eyes. He looked at our legs. He held his ruler in his hand, tapping it gently against his thigh. Tick-tock tick. This rhythm became the metronome of our terror. He would sometimes stop in front of a woman at random, it seemed. He would squat down. He would place the ruler against her skin, measuring the distance between her knee and the frayed hem. The feel of the cold wood against her flesh, the man's breath on her skin. It was a violation without penetration, a repeated psychological rape before hundreds of helpless witnesses. If the measurement wasn't exact, if the fabric had slipped down a millimeter, he didn't shout. He simply made a gesture with his hand, and the woman was gone. I remember Elise. She was 19. She came from Lyon. She was shy, the kind of girl who blushed when a boy spoke to her. She had tried sewing a piece of cloth to the bottom of her skirt to gain a few centimeters of warmth. It was clumsy, crude stitches made with a makeshift needle. During the inspection, Heinz stopped in front of her. He saw the alteration. He didn't tear the fabric. He smiled. He placed his gloved hand on I's shoulder and asked gently if she was cold. She nodded, her head trembling, tears welling in her eyes. "Warmth is earned," he murmured. He ordered her to stand in the center of the yard while we left for forced labor. When we returned that evening, she was still there. She had fallen in the snow, blue, lifeless. The ruler lay across her body like a signature. That night, I understood that we weren't there to work. We were there to be broken, and I knew my turn would inevitably come because my skirt seemed to shrink a little more each day from the rain and the washing. I felt Heinz's gaze upon me, calculating, patient. He was waiting for the moment I would make a mistake. But what I didn't yet know was that Heinz's cruelty knew no bounds, and that the 16 centimeters were only the beginning of a much darker experiment he was preparing in the secrecy of the infirmary. If you ask me what fear smells like, I won't tell you it smells of sweat or urine, as you often read in cheap novels. No, in Block 4, fear had an almost metallic mineral odor. It smelled of cree, soiled snow, and damp fabric that never dries. The winter of 1944 settled in not as a season, but as an additional guardian, even more cruel than the armed men in the watchtowers. The cold became a living entity, a presence that seeped under our fingernails and into the very marrow of our bones, transforming every movement into a test of willpower. But it wasn't the climate that was slowly killing us. It was the tent. It was that suspension of time between the siren wailing, tearing through the pitch-black night at 4 a.m., and Heinz appearing at the end of the aisle. Those minutes felt like centuries. We stood there, lined up in perfect rows of 5, motionless like ice statues, our breaths creating small clouds of steam that rose toward the indifferent sky. I remember the physical sensation of the tent. My heart no longer beat in my chest. It pounded in my throat, a frantic drum that threatened to suffocate me. I stared at the nape of the neck of the woman in front of me, a certain Marianne, counting the protruding vertebrae of her spine to keep from panicking. 1, 2, 3. Each vertebra was a mountain to climb. Stay upright, don't move, don't cough. Above all, don't tremble, because Heinz hated trembling. He said that the human body, if disciplined, should be able to control its primitive reflexes. Shivering from cold wasn't a physiological reaction for him. It was an admission of weakness, an insult to the order he was trying to impose on the chaos of our lives. The 16 centimeters routine had evolved. At first it was a visual inspection, humiliating certainly but quick. But as the weeks went by, Heinz transformed this procedure into an almost religious ceremony, a slow and meticulous ritual aimed at breaking what remained of our cohesion. He no longer simply measured. He observed, he took notes. He had a small black leather-bound notebook that he kept carefully in the inside pocket of his coat. I often wondered what he wrote in it. Names, numbers, death sentences. I pictured him in his heated office at night, drinking a glass of schnapps and rereading his notes on our knees, our scars, our blue veins showing through the translucent skin. The thought made me nauseous. The idea that we had become these subjects of study, these laboratory specimens, was more unbearable than the physical violence. One morning, he stopped in front of a young Belgian girl, Aude. She had tried to cheat. We all did it in one way or another. She had tugged at the loose elastic at her waist to pull down her skirt, hoping to gain an inch of warmth on her scaly thighs. Heinz saw it immediately. He didn't use his ruler right away. He moved closer to her, his face just inches from hers. I could see the mist of his breath mingling with Aude's. He smiled that smile that never showed his teeth. A simple stretching of the lips that never reached her steely gray eyes. "You think I can't see," he murmured. His voice was soft, paternal, terrifying. "You think you can manipulate reality with a piece of fabric?" He took a step back and took out the ruler. The gesture was slow, theatrical. The sound of the wood snapping against his gloved palm echoed in the absolute silence of the courtyard. He placed the instrument on Aude's leg. The measurement was wrong, the skirt was too low. According to his logic, she had stolen 16 centimeters of visibility from the Reich. "Dishonesty," he declared, addressing all of us without taking his eyes off Adele. "And like any disease, it must be purged." He didn't hit Adele. He didn't order the guard to take her away. He did worse. He ordered Aude to hold the ruler herself against her own leg and remain there with her arm outstretched, her posture rigid, until her muscles they gave in. We had to leave for work, leaving her there, alone in the middle of the roll call square, a living statue of submission. When we returned that evening, 12 hours later, she was gone. The ruler lay on the ground, broken in two. Adele never returned to Barracks 4. We later learned that she had been transferred to the infirmary, a place we dreaded more than death itself. For the infirmary was not a place of healing, it was the antechamber of disappearance. From that day on, the atmosphere in the barracks changed. A toxic mistrust settled between us. Heinz had pulled off his masterstroke. He had turned us against each other without uttering a single explicit threat. We began to watch each other. "Your skirt is too long," one would whisper. "You'll get us punished," another hissed. Solidarity, that the fragile bond that had allowed us to hold on was fraying under the pressure of those 16 centimeters. I saw long-standing friendships shattered over a lopsided hem. I saw women denounce their bedmates for attempting to mend a hole, hoping to gain the unseen favor of the executioner. We had become the wardens of our own prison. I remember one night when I couldn't sleep. I lay with my eyes open in the darkness, listening to the snores and moans of my companions. I felt dirty, not with grime, but with a moral filth. I had spent the day obsessively checking my own attire, internalizing Heinz's gaze until it became my own conscience. I disgusted myself. I was 3 years old. I loved Rilke and the music of Debussy. And yet, my mental universe had shrunk to the length of a piece of gray wool. That was the enemy's true victory. To colonize our minds before even destroying our bodies. But horror, as I learned, has levels. You think you've hit rock bottom and then you discover there's a cellar below. The next phase of the escalation didn't take place in the courtyard, but inside our own quarters. It was a February evening. The snowstorm was shaking the barracks walls. We were huddled together, trying to hold on to what little warmth we'd accumulated during the day. Suddenly the door burst open. The icy wind rushed in, extinguishing the few candles we'd managed to light. In the doorway, silhouetted against the blinding whiteness outside, stood Heinz. He wasn't alone. He was accompanied by 2 doctors in white coats carrying leather briefcases. This wasn't a disciplinary inspection. It was something else. Something more clinical, more intrusive. "Lights," barked one of the guards. The electric lamps flickered and flooded the room with a harsh yellow light, revealing our squalor in all its ugliness. We jumped from our bunks, snapping to attention at the foot of the trembling beds, our nightgowns offering no protection. Heinz walked slowly down the center aisle. He wasn't looking at our skirts this time. He was looking at our bare legs, our skin. He stopped in front of me. My heart stopped. He pointed his ruler at my left shin. There was a small cut there, a graze I'd gotten working in the stone quarry. It was infected, red, throbbing. "Interesting," he said, turning to one of the doctors. "Mark this up. Subject 784. Tissue resistance compromised. Progression of necrosis to be monitored." The doctor nodded and scribbled something on a block. I felt like a freak show animal, a biological curiosity. He didn't see my pain. He saw a piece of data. Heinz moved even closer. He raised his ruler not to hit me, but to draw an imaginary line across my skin from my knee to my ankle. The wood was cold, so cold it burned. "Do you know," he whispered, using my number as if it were my only name, "that beauty lies in asymmetry, and that disease is asymmetry. Your legs, they offend the natural order." That night they selected 5 women. Not the weakest nor the sickest. They chose those with the most interesting legs according to Heinz's obscure criteria. Women with varicose veins, with scars, with birthmarks. They were led to the infirmary, escorted by the silent doctors. We didn't know what would happen to them. We could only imagine. An imagination in a place like this is worse than reality. I spent the rest of the night rubbing my leg, trying to erase the phantom sensation of the ruler on my skin, trying to cleanse the stain of his attention. But deep down I felt this was only the prelude. Heinz was bored. The routine of the morning inspections was no longer enough for him. He was looking for something deeper, more intimate. He was looking to see what lay beneath the skin. The next day at roll call, the 5 women were not there. Their places in the ranks were empty like missing teeth in a jaw. No one dared ask any questions. Silence was our only armor. But around noon, as we carried stones under the watchful eyes of the guards, I saw the infirmary door open. A stretcher was carried out. It was covered with a white sheet, but the wind lifted a corner of the fabric. I am not sure of what I saw. It was a leg. But it no longer resembled a human leg. It was bandaged, deformed as if someone had tried to reshape it. I looked away, bile rising in my throat. I understood then that the 16 centimeters wasn't just a rule of modesty or discipline. It was a measure of access. It was the zone Heinz had reserved for himself, the right to control, alter, destroy. Our legs had become his canvas, and he was beginning to paint his masterpiece of horror. I swore to myself that day that I wouldn't let him take me, that I would hide my injury, that I would walk straight even if the bone in my leg broke. I started stealing scraps of paper from the trash cans in the administrative office where I sometimes cleaned the floor. I chewed them into a paste that I applied to my wound to conceal it, then covered it with dust so that it would melted with my filthy skin. It was ludicrous, pathetic, but it was my act of resistance. Every morning, I presented my 16 centimeters of bare flesh for inspection, breathless, praying that its eagle eye wouldn't detect the deception. I gambled with my life, every day, every hour, but I didn't know that the real danger didn't come from my injured leg. The real danger came from a rumor that was starting to circulate in the camp. A rumor about a new directive from Berlin. A directive that would give Heinz absolute power over our very fertility. And this rumor had a terrifying code name that we barely whispered in the dark. The Purity Protocol. People often say that hope keeps you alive. That's false. In a camp, hope is a useless calorie that the body burns in vain. What keeps you alive is hatred. It's a cold, hard ember, lodged somewhere between the stomach and the heart that it keeps you upright when your muscles have long since surrendered. By the spring of 1944, I lived only for that hatred. It was directed entirely at that immaculate white door, which marked the entrance to the infirmary. Unlike the rest of the camp, made of rotten wood and blackened ends, the infirmary shone. It was obscenely clean, the windows were washed. Sometimes through the panes, you could glimpse figures in white moving with a reassuring, almost divine slowness. But we all knew that this building was not a place of healing. It was the belly of the beast. And the rumor of the Purity Protocol was no longer just a rumor. It had become a list. Every morning after roll call, an officer read out numbers. Those who were called up didn't go to forced labor. They walked toward the white door. Some returned a few days later, empty-eyed, walking with a strange stiffness, as if their hips had been fused together. Others never returned. My turn came on a Thursday in April. The sky was an insolent blue, dotted with small, cottony clouds that reminded me of afternoons on the stage platforms. When my number 784 was called, the world fell silent. I didn't hear the birds. I didn't hear the wind. I only heard the blood roaring in my ears, a gurgling sound that drowned everything out. My comrades instinctively moved aside, creating a void around me, as if I were already contagious, already marked by death. I didn't cry, I moved forward. I crossed the courtyard, feeling the thousands of eyes fixed on my back. It was the longest walk of my life. Each step took me further from the world of the living and closer to the world of shadows. As I reached the white door, a smell hit me. Not the smell of death. No. The smell of ether and carbolic acid. A clean, surgical smell that stung the nostrils and made the eyes water. It was the smell of civilization diverted from its original purpose to serve barbarity. Inside, the contrast was blinding. After months spent in the filthy gloom of the barracks, the fluorescent lights hurt my retinas. Everything was tiled in white. The floor gleamed. There was no dust. A hushed silence reigned, broken only by the clink of a metal instrument and the muffled sound of footsteps on the linoleum. I was ordered to undress, not with the guard's usual brutality, but with clinical indifference. A nurse, a woman with a stern face and cold hands, took my tattered clothes and placed them in a wicker basket as if they were ordinary dirty laundry. I found myself naked in the center of the room, shivering under the harsh light. Then the back door opened. Heinz came in. He wasn't wearing his gray-green military uniform. He was wearing a pristine white coat, buttoned up to the neck. Without his insignia, without his skull and crossbones cap, he looked like any family doctor, any university professor. That was the most terrifying thing about him, his normality. He was holding his black notebook as always. He came up to me, looked me in the eyes with that empty curiosity that chilled me to the bone. "Number 784, he said softly. "Subject with high resistance potential. We'll see if the hypothesis holds true." He gestured for me to lie down on the examination table. The leather was icy cold against my back. He strapped me down. Thick leather straps around my wrists and ankles. I didn't struggle. I was in shock. My mind had detached itself from my body and was floating somewhere on the ceiling, observing the scene like a helpless spectator. That's when he took out the ruler, the same wooden ruler he used in the courtyard. But here, in this temple of perverted science, it took on a different meaning. He placed it on my left thigh. He took a pen with purple ink. With meticulous precision, he drew a line on my skin exactly 16 centimeters above my knee. Then he drew another line higher, near the groin. He delineated a rectangle of flesh. "You've always wondered why 16 centimeters, he murmured, as if confiding an intimate secret. He was preparing a syringe, drawing a clear liquid from a glass vial. "It's not modesty, Noemi. It's architecture. It's in this precise area that the major lymphatic and muscular networks are located. It's here that the force of walking resides. If we control this area, we control movement, we control escape." He wasn't talking about killing, he was talking about paralyzing, altering. I understood then the horror of what he was doing to other women. He wasn't trying to heal wounds. He was testing chemical agents, neurotoxic poisons directly into the muscles that allowed us to stand. He was trying to create a human body that would be alive, conscious, but incapable of rebelling, incapable of running, a perfect biological slave. The purity he spoke of wasn't racial, it was functional. A pure body was a body that obeyed without the mind being able to intervene. He brought the needle close to the area marked with purple ink. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, paralyzed with terror. Closed my eyes. Felt the prick. Not a sharp pain, but a cold, deep burn that spread instantly up my thigh like snake venom. "Calm to count back from 10, he ordered. Dice. I felt the cold rising. My leg no longer belonged to me. It was becoming heavy, dense like stone. The cold reached my hip. Violent nausea overwhelmed me. The ceiling lights began to spin, creating pulsating halos. I heard a strange noise, an S sound, an electric hum coming from the next room. I turned my head, fighting the drug flooding my brain. The door was ajar. God, I saw what was there. On another table there was a woman. I couldn't see her face, but I could see her legs. They were spread open, exposed, and the skin of her thighs had been peeled back like a glove turned inside out. You could see the red, sharp, throbbing muscles. Another doctor was working on them, not to stitch them up, but to insert something thing. Fragments of glass, wood. I didn't know. I just saw him turning a woman into a puzzle of flesh and pain. 7, I screamed. A harsh, animalistic cry that tore at my throat. Heinz sighed, annoyed as if I had interrupted a classical music concert. He placed his gloved hand over my mouth. The smell of latex choked me. "Shoo," he whispered. "Pain is information. Don't waste it screaming. Analyze it. Witness your own sacrifice." The drug finally took over. Blackness invaded my vision, starting at the edges until only a narrow tunnel stared into Heinz's gray eyes. I could feel him resuming his measuring. I could feel him measuring the depth of the incision he was about to make. The last thing I remember before slipping into unconsciousness is his calm voice and didactic explanation to the nurse. "Note the reaction. The subject exhibits above-average nervous resistance. We will be able to increase the dose." I woke up hours or perhaps days later. I was lying on a cot in a crowded recovery room. The smell of blood and fleas was unbearable. I tried to move my left leg. Nothing. It was there, I could see it wrapped in thick bandages, stained with yellowish fluids, but I couldn't feel it. It was a dead weight attached to my body. Panic. I touched the bandage frantically. Under the layers of gauze I felt the shape, the scar. It was long, straight, perfectly geometric. It measured exactly 16 centimeters. He had marked me. I had become one of his works. Around me, in the dim light, I could hear moans. "My legs, I can't feel my legs anymore," voices murmured in the dark. We were the legion of the broken, the guinea pigs of Block 11. But what Heinz didn't know, what his cold science hadn't foreseen, was that the paralysis of the body sometimes awakens an unknown force of the mind. Lying there, unable to get up, feeling the fire of infection begin to burn beneath the bandages, I made a decision. I would not die here. I would not give him that satisfaction. He had taken my muscles, he had taken my ability to run, but he had made a fatal mistake. He had left me alive with my memory, and I was going to use that memory as a weapon. I looked at the cracked ceiling of the infirmary and swore that if I got out of here, every inch of scarring on my body would become a line in his indictment. But to get out, I first had to survive the night. And that night, as the fever rose and delirium began to dance before my eyes, I heard the heavy footsteps of approaching soldiers. They weren't coming for an inspection. They were coming with bags, black bags the size of human bodies. The experiment was over for some of us, and the cleanup was beginning. The end of the world didn't arrive with celestial trumpets, nor with the silence of death. It arrived with a smell, the smell of burning paper. It was January 1945. From my straw mattress in the infirmary, unable to walk without screaming in pain, I could smell the acrid smoke filling the corridors. The Germans were burning the archives. They were burning the lists, the medical reports, the black notebooks where Heinz had meticulously recorded our agonies. It was panic. For the first time, I heard not the sharp clatter of boots marching in step, but the chaotic sound of running. Orders shouted, engines coughed in the cold, and there were sporadic gunshots. They erased the evidence, and we women of Block 4 were the living proof. Fear changed sides that day, but it never left us. We knew that Nazi logic preferred to leave no witnesses. Crawled out of bed. My left leg was a numb block of lead, yet burning with a phantom pain. I dragged myself to the frosted window. Outside the snow was ash-gray. I saw Heinz one last time. He was no longer wearing his white coat. He had put on his gray coat, the collar turned up. He was carrying a suitcase. He wasn't running. He was walking toward a black car, calm, methodical to the very end. He didn't look toward the infirmary. He didn't look at his works. He got into the car and disappeared into the white fog. He carried with him our names, our measurements, and the science of our destruction. When the Russian tanks smashed through the barbed wire 2 days later, I felt no joy. It's a terrible thing to say, I know. You expect scenes of jubilation, embraces, flowers thrown on the armored vehicles. But when you've been reduced to an object for 2 years, you don't become human again in a second. I looked at those foreign soldiers with their eyes wide with horror as they discovered our living skeletons, and I felt only immense weariness. A young soldier approached me. He was crying. He held out a gloved hand to help me up. Tried. I put my weight on my left leg and collapsed. My leg gave way beneath me like shattered glass. Heinz treatment had worked. It had destroyed the deep muscular structure. Even free, I could no longer stand without help. I was free, but I was broken. It was her last victory, her last silent laugh. I would leave that camp, but I would never walk like a free woman again. I would always walk with the stiffness of a prisoner. The return to Paris was another kind of hell. I was welcomed at the Eastern Guard station like a heroine, but I felt like a ghost. My family was waiting for me. My mother, aged 10 years in my absence, screamed when she saw my condition. She wanted to hold me, feed me, wash me. She wanted to erase the camp, but you can't erase the camp. The camp was inside me. It was in my nightmares, where the clacking of the ruler woke me every night. It was in my relationship with food, which I instinctively hid under my pillow, and above all, it was etched onto my thigh. The Parisian doctors examined my leg with perplexity. They had never seen such atrophy, such targeted necrosis. They saw the scar, 16 centimeters, a straight, white, pearly line that cut across my skin like an impassable border. They asked me what it was. I lied. I said it was an accident, a fall on metal. How could I explain the truth to them? How could I tell them that a man had reshaped my anatomy to satisfy an obsession with control? The truth was too obscene for the world of the living. So I kept it to myself. I learned to walk with a cane. I learned to hide my leg under baggy trousers or long skirts well below the knee. Always below the knee. Years passed. I saw the world change. I saw Reconstruction, the economic boom, oblivion. I saw Heinz disappear from history. One name among many that was never brought to justice. Perhaps he became a respected doctor in West Germany, caring for children, stroking blonde heads with the same hands that had injected me with poison. The thought drove me mad, but the cruelest irony came in the 1960s, with the sexual revolution. Suddenly, the women of Paris, the girls of my own generation and their children, began to liberate themselves. And the symbol of this freedom was the miniskirt. I walked the streets of Saint-Germain, leaning on my cane, and I saw these thousands of young women proudly, carefree, undressing, showing off their legs. They were showing their thighs to the sun. They were claiming the right to show their skin. For them, it was an act of rebellion, of joy. For me, it was a vision of horror. Every time I saw a hemline ride up above the knee, I saw the wooden ruler again. I saw the cold again, I saw the selection process again. I wanted to shout at them. Cover yourselves. Don't give them that, don't give them access. But I remained silent. I was an old woman, bitter, a relic of a time everyone wanted to forget. I stared at my own legs in the bathroom mirror. Alone, the door locked. The scar was still there. It hadn't aged. It had remained frozen in time. A monument of flesh to my dehumanization. 16 centimeters. The exact distance between their indifference and my eternal prison. I tried to have a normal life. I got married. My husband was a good man, a former resistance fighter with his own silences. He never asked me about the scar. Sometimes he would touch it with his fingertips in the dark with an infinite sadness, as one touches a sacred and cursed relic. But I was never able to have children. The purity protocol hadn't just affected my muscles. The injections had traveled further, deeper. Heinz had sterilized my future at the same time as he paralyzed my walking. I was a genetic dead end. My lineage ended with me. That was the ultimate goal, wasn't it? Not only to kill us but to prevent us from being mothers, from being creators. He had succeeded. I am an empty house, a library whose books have been burned. Today I am 82 years old. My leg aches every day. When the weather changes, when it rains, the scar pulls as if the invisible stitches are tightening. It is my barometer. It is my daily reminder that the past is never truly past. I watch the news on television, I see modern wars. I see refugees, camps, barbed wire. And I wonder what their measure is. What is the new rule? 'Cause there is always a rule. Evil changes its face, it changes its uniform, it changes its language, but it always needs to measure, to classify, to divide. He needs to reduce humanity to numbers so he can destroy it without remorse. Heinz wasn't a monster from hell. He was a man. A man who loved order, symmetry, and obedience. And men like him are everywhere. In offices, in governments, in hospitals, they're just waiting for the power to unleash their rules. I'm tired now. Talking about all this has exhausted me. I feel like I've run a marathon with a dead leg. But I had to say it. Someone had to know that behind the grand dates of history, behind the peace treaties and the overall figures for victims, there are tiny, intimate, terrifying stories. There's the story of a wooden ruler and a gray skirt. There's the story of 16 centimeters. I'll leave you with one thought, just one. Tonight, when you get home, when you take off your clothes in complete safety, in the warmth of your room, look at your body, look at your skin. It's the only thing that truly belongs to you. It's your last territory. But ask yourself this question and be honest. If tomorrow someone told you that your dignity, your freedom, your right to live depended on a single number imposed by another, how far would you let the rule go before saying no? At what exact centimeter do you cease to be human and become a slave? I learned the answer too late. And you? Noémie Clairvaux's story leaves us facing a deafening silence. What we have just heard is not merely the account of physical survival. It is the autopsy of a system designed to crush the human soul with mathematical precision. These 16 centimeters are not simply a wartime anecdote. They are the terrifying symbol of how quickly dignity can be taken from us when we cease to defend it. Noemi carried this scar alone for decades. But today, by listening to her voice, we share its weight. Memory is the only antidote to the repetition of history. And this memory is now yours to carry. This channel's mission is to unearth these buried truths, to give a voice to those whom history books have reduced to mute statistics. Producing these documentaries requires in-depth research and a total commitment to the truth. If this story has moved you, if you believe it is essential not to let oblivion engulf these destinies, we invite you to support our work. A simple like on this video, a subscription to the channel, it's not just an algorithmic click, it's an act of support, a way of saying, I will not forget, a way of ensuring that these testimonies continue to exist. But your role doesn't end there. History only lives if it is discussed, shared, felt. We would like to read your thoughts, your raw emotions after this journey to the end of the night. In the comments below, tell us how you feel about this testimony. In a modern world where our freedoms seem taken for granted, what is, for you, the insurmountable limit? What is the rule you will never let anyone impose on you? Share your thoughts with our community. Every comment adds another stone to the edifice of collective memory. Proof that humanity, despite its scars, remains standing and vigilant. Thank you for listening to the end. Thank you for being among those who remember. See you soon for another story that time has tried to erase.